The FTC issued a report last year that said the system for resolving consumer debt collection disputes is broken, and it suggested a number of legislative and regulatory reforms to fix it. One of the concerns the report raised had to do with properly notifying consumers about suits filed against them. Advances in technology, however, are helping to improve process service and compliance. Here to discuss those advances and the challenges that remain is Joel Rosenthal, an expert in consumer debt collection and compliance. Thanks for joining us, Joel.
Thank you, Oliver. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to do this session with your group.
Thank you. The FTC report said that the system is broken. What are the biggest challenges related to process service from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting because one can certainly understand that there are certain aspects of the industry that are broken, and maybe it's particular entities within industries. But speaking about process serving in specific, it's in my mind, the general process serving company is sort of in a deep dark cave in terms of technology and in particular about compliance. And whereas the rest of the industry, the other pillars of the industry, such as the collection attorneys, the debt buyers, the creditors, the collection agencies, all the other pillars within the space are firmly aware of the compliance challenges and the need for both best practices and for their own keeping their heads above water, the need for constant technological improvement. But process servers it's hard to say that anything about a group of people or companies, but in this particular case I think it's accurate, is that they're really like the Cro-Magnon living in the cave and doesn't know that another group of the Homo sapiens have learned how to make fire and learned how to do all these other things and sort of pass them by. And it's talking out of the analogy, in terms of compliance, one of the biggest challenges within process serving is validity of really serving somebody. And there have been some scandals in other parts of, throughout the country. Frankly, the most prominent was in New York, of where there was the term coined sewer service, of literally where people were throwing the papers in the garbage. I don't know if they literally went in the sewer. But they weren't being served, and then they're signing legal affidavits for the court saying that they have made service. The big scandal in New York was there was the major process serving company in that state was signing affidavits that the same process server was in Buffalo and New York City at the same time, which other than Star Trek technology would not be possible. And so, that it was a house of cards that sort of collapsed with that. So, my company, and I don't want to tout my company, but JJL Process has taken a completely different direction and there are a few others within the space that have understood that you need to have, sort of proof or some substance behind what you're doing. And it's really all driven by technology. And so, the compliance challenge, the primary compliance challenge is not signing a document saying that you've served somebody when you haven't. As simple as that. And there's, dozens of other challenges that one can say. But the solution to that is through technology. And we can get into that later in some of the questions that you're probably going to ask. Sure. But I think that's the general answer to sort of what the biggest challenge would be to the process serving industry.
So you mentioned that there have been all of these technological advances, and yet it seems like there's been slow pickup on the process serving side. Any ideas as to why that might be the case?
Well, it's a pretty splintered group. I mean, in general, you're still dealing with mom and pop companies. Some of them, frankly, no more advanced than a delivery service, that and I'm not talking about FedEx. I'm talking about, like somebody who's doing it on their kitchen table.
Right.
And there's, thousands of these entities all over the place. And unlike, other industries in this country that have really centralized nationally and sort of, 2 or 3 or 5 companies have sort of taken over the whole space. That really hasn't happened yet in process serving. And I think some of these scandals are going to frankly drive that because, some of the clearly the creditors the collection law firms are very aware of the problems that become associated with some of these problems that have happened, and are really looking for the technological advances that I think, JJL, my company, and some of the other companies within the space have brought out. And I think the most important is I would call it sort of an electronic leash. And there's no, it's not a patented term, but sort of a term that I think fits of what you need to put on the actual process servers in the field, because unlike in the call center collection space where you can listen in on the phone calls or record things, it's not as simple as when you've got people out in the field who are there's nobody managing them at that very moment that has an eye on them. And so what my company has done, and it's sort of been, a few other companies have done this within the space, is created what I would term the electronic leash, which is through smartphone technology, having it where when a process server makes an attempt to serve someone, whether it be a business or a person, so at the residence or at the company doorstep, taking a smartphone photo, not of the defendant, but of the address and proving that they've been there, and having a GPS coordinate stamped and time and date stamped, so one has a record that they've physically been to here, and here is, substance of a photo behind that. And then, as the multiple times that they may have to go there before they actually have a successful serve, or sometimes you don't have a successful serve, you build a portfolio of evidence that you've actually been to that location. And secondly, there's also to get around that issue of being in Buffalo and New York City at the same time, what is sort of an ancillary to the electronic leash is knowing that it takes X amount of time to go between point A and point B and point C on a daily run of process serving. And what we do on our system is we'll have sort of the way MapQuest or Google Maps would have that it takes 5 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to go between point A and point B. Well, we do a feasibility analysis for every process server of making sure that, unlike sort of what FedEx would do or UPS, who want to minimize that time in their route, we want to make sure it's feasible. So if it says it takes 20 minutes, we don't want it to be done in 5. If it takes an hour and it's supposed to take 20, that's fine. That's feasible. And so creating a leash on people from that way. The third step of that would be to make sure that they don't have too high a percentage of first serves. Because there's a norm within the industry of sort of how many times you serve on the first time versus the second time, the third time. If it looks out of whack, that's another sort of warning sign. And what you can do is really score all these things. So you can score the feasibility of the attempts and the time within them, and the first attempts versus second attempt serves, and you can create a score that can roll up to sort of whether this is really in working within that electronic leash. Now, the other thing that I think is important is to audit that, because you can gather all that data, but if you don't look at it, and sometimes in this society with all the data we collect, we sometimes get so overwhelmed with it that we don't even look at it. Right. So I think another very important piece is to actually have an internal audit department for looking at that data and looking at it on a very regular and a no exception basis. Every single thing should be looked at, not spot checking and all of that. And I think if you put all those pieces of what I would term the electronic leash together, the industry can be brought out of the compliance and technology dark ages. But I might add to that, I think there's a second very important piece of that, is that's all well and good to have all of that, but if it's not transparent to your client, it's no good. So I think, the industry also has been sort of in the past, and in most of the companies in the present, having it as a completely untransparent industry, so that you couldn't find out what was going on. You couldn't have access to, looking at things particularly in real time, and you couldn't pull your own data or reports. So the modern process serving company has it where there's a complete transparency and the client has 24/7 access to what's going on with, frankly, their papers. And without, all of these things in place, you're really not pulling things into the modernity of where the rest of the industry is.
And given the fact that there's a new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on the beat, compliance issues are going to become even more stringent, and it sounds like a lot of this technology is really going to help to make that much better.
I agree with that, and I think that whatever we feel about the new Consumer Finance Bureau, and it's obviously a big wild card right now since we're in its first month or two. Who knows what's going to happen with that? But clearly, they're not going to soften the need to properly notify consumers. That will not be in their bailiwick. I mean, no matter what comes. And so, it's funny. A lot of people, when you're in the process serving industry and you're actually in, the 21st century delivering physical papers rather than an electronic paper, which is sort of in every other industry, I don't think that's going to change. I think, even states that may have less stringent requirements, some states have mail requirements and mail notice and whatnot. I think frankly, regulation is probably going to pull that more towards the norm of proper notification of where people literally, have to be served and where there's some proof that they've been served rather than, just a letter which could go and, who knows who got it, who opened it and what, other issues that may open in terms of privacy and whatnot. The other thing that I think is really important, that's another trend within the space, is just like with the collection attorneys are having more contentious issues with FDCPA and any of the other laws that are out there, whether they be state or federal. There's been nationally an increase in quash hearings of service of process, which I don't think that's going to lessen. I think that's going to continue. It fits within the sort of contentious activity and behavior of the defendants. And this whole process of having photos and having a record of some of the notes of what the process servers have done and all the other things that sort of bring the technology into the 21st century have been very meaningful. I mean, my company, JJL, has had the opportunity of defeating quash hearings just through the evidence that we've built up through our system. And other companies, I'm sure, could do the same thing if they brought themselves up to that level of technology. So I think, it's those would be the two trends. I think that it's not going to soften in terms of the personal notification requirements of process serving, as well as I think there will be continuing uptick in the quash hearings that we've seen going for the last, it keeps ticking upward every month.
Well, Joel, thank you very much for your insights. A lot of important stuff to consider, and you can learn more about the latest trends in process service and technology from Joel at CLLA's fall meeting, November 10th through the 12th at the Sheraton New York Hotel. We hope to see you there. Thanks again, Joel.
Thank you, Oliver. I appreciate it.